thank you, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here at the ICG and also to see many friendly faces in the audience. So, as we were introduced already, and we've lost a bit of time setting up this projection, so we'll get straight on to the talk, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time afterwards if any of you have questions, observations, reactions. Always happy to listen to them. So, yeah. So, this book, Food and Farming, A Journey Through India in Comics, is a small little book. That's why I took that photograph where you can see me behind it, so that gives you a sense of the size of it. Shalmali is holding up a copy. It's a small, square, fat book. And there's a reason why it came out in this format, but we'll come to that later. So essentially, this idea came up to come do a visual book on food and farming around 2020, just around after the farmers' agitation and the farmers' movement was still ongoing, but it had become a very hot topic, so to speak. People in cities and the consuming classes and others who never thought about things like minimum support price, public distribution system. This was never part of the everyday conversations of especially the urban people, but also of many rural elites and others. And I think it's very important. The farmers' movement showed us why it is necessary to maintain your food sovereignty and how easily that can be subverted. We just all take it for granted that we will go to the market and find food there. But who guarantees that? How do we never thought about those things. What happens if you go to the market one day and there's nothing to buy? So there is a system, a fail-safe system by which food must be made available at all times to all the people of this country. So we decided to kind of suddenly people were talking about MSP and the whole idea of public distribution, this, that, but without really knowing what is MSP? I mean, the farmers' movement brought these thoughts and ideas and terminologies to the fore. And we thought that it would be really good to kind of do a book which digs into all of this and explains it to readers in an interesting and accessible way. So we came up with this book, essentially to do it as a graphic narrative without becoming too preachy. We decided to start with kind of build the entire series around two characters. They're called Lucky and Sony. So names that are sort of universal. I mean, you don't identify that with any particular part of India, but their journey, they're like two people traveling, young people who have a marginal understanding or connection with agriculture and farming, but who are actually on a journey to discover what all this is about and how it works, and what are the farmers agitating about, what are they demanding, what's wrong with the corporatization of the food cycles and chains. So all of these things, these kids start cycling around India, meeting people, and that's the underlying storyline. And also, I think what's important is for Shalmali and me and other colleagues like Vidyun and Harsho and Ranjini, that we needed to sort of base it on solid research and on stuff that would make sense. Shalmali and her team provided us a lot of the background material to begin with, like how could we approach this, and we started to think. So there was me and my team, co-authors with Vidyun and Harsho, who started to brainstorm on how. One thing was clear from the beginning for us is that this travels across India would happen in ways that are very authentic and real. I mean, when the characters are fictional, but their settings, their backgrounds, the places they travel to, the problems that they encounter in different parts of the country are very well researched, and both visually and of course in terms of the content. So would you like to say something now at this point, Shal, or shall I carry on?
Yeah. So the organization that I work with, focus on the Global South. For more than 2 decades, we've been working on the issue of the right to food and food sovereignty, and also analyzing how financial and economic policies affect people's right to food. So basically what we do with policy research, we don't speak on behalf of, but we try and make sure that policymakers are hearing the voices of those who are actually producing the food, producing goods and services, the workers and so on. And, so that there's a direct dialogue and relationship between governments who are enacting policy and those who are bearing the brunt of it. And for a very long time, we've been doing analysis and research on food systems. And not only our research, but it's global research done by, we're activists, we're an activist think tank, so people can easily dismiss it, you guys are lefties, you guys are activists. But the non-lefties and activist groups from the United Nations, and even, for example, the Planning Commission in India before it became Niti Aayog, and others have shown that majority of the world's food is produced by small-scale food providers, which are our machwars, our fisher folk, our peasants, our forest communities. And that majority of the world's working classes are fed by a diversity of food systems, which is not all production, but it's also gathering, hunting, processing, and so on. And I think all of you in Goa know this very well. And in India, countries like India, where there's such a diversity of climatic zones and geographic zones and such a huge biodiversity, definitely more than 80% of the world, of India's population, is eating through local production and not through global food systems, not through supermarkets and so on. And so and we've been working with the farmers' movement on these issues, on public procurement, on trade issues, and economic agreements and so on. MSP, and then the whole issue of mandis and what do they do and how do farmers then find their, MSP, for example, is only there for a few crops. Majority of the crops in India, majority of the staples don't have MSP. But the fact is that the farmers went out there and they said, do what you will, we will lay siege and we will not let you erode whatever few rights we have. So Orijit and I, we were discussing at that time and with our teams and their teams and said, this is a really good time to actually reach out to all those people who say, what's the problem with farmers? Why are they blocking our roads? Why are they, what's the issue here? Because for those who are actually buying their food in a supermarket or whatever, they don't actually know the toil and the huge amount of stuff that goes into producing the food. So this is sort of, just maybe reinforcing a little bit this point. And also we wanted to show that it's the farmers that we're working with, and the farmers who are feeding us are not only feeding us by production, they're also protecting nature, they're also protecting the environment, they're protecting biodiversity. And without this biodiversity, there is no food. And I think we ended up with a very good compatibility here. Yeah. In terms of both, how do we say, the research part of it and the creative part of it, because they're all melded together.
Yeah, I think that's really, that works well when your research is solid and not just like based on reading up stuff online or in libraries, but based on actual experience across different parts of Asia, like Shal, you and your team have done. And I think that also provides a really good space for visualizing things in a creative way and getting points across. And of course, when something comes from the research team and we kind of translate that into a narrative bit, then it goes back. So it's a back and forth process. But I think that worked very well, and I'm happy with the results of that. So we tackle various issues, starting with things like this, like what is the, how hungry is India? And unlike all of us well-fed people, we have to say that India is in a very serious situation as far as hunger is concerned in this country. and we explain how these parameters. It's not as though we say, give a figure and say India is 113, the hunger index or whatever. We explain the parameters by which hunger is measured. And not just hunger as a temporary thing, but as a kind of lifetime debilitating issue that India has not been able to address adequately for all its people. So this is so in between our narrative that goes on, we have these little slides which sum up like this is at the end of a chapter, and it says that according to the 2021 Global Hunger Index, 5.3% of India's population is undernourished. Children are 15.3, sorry. Our children are particularly vulnerable and so on. 3 out of 10 children suffer from stunting. 1 out of 10 suffer from wasting. And out of every 100 children, not even, sorry. Yeah, okay, well, you guys can read it, so it's fine. So usually what happens is when I project comics, people in the audience say, oh, we can't read what's there, so then I have to sit and read it out. But I'm glad that you can see it. Anyway, so these are figures from United Nations reports. I mean, these are not cooked up stories, and they're nothing to do with who's being critical of who. These are facts. So we see Sunny and Lucky traveling, meeting people. So it's not like one person is saying everything. There are multiple voices coming in from academics to workers to farmers. We try to include a kind of range of voices in our story. If you want me to go slower, you tell me, but we have quite a lot of ground to cover.
And the voices and the testimonies of workers is particularly important in the current context when MNREGA has been redacted. You know, MNREGA has, I mean, I think it's pretty much a national crime what's happened to MNREGA. This is also another big issue happening with the nomadic herding communities. I mean, all of you have read about what's happening with the Van Gujars, and they're right now meeting in the north on this whole issue of celebrating their Gojri buffaloes, but also figuring out how they can continue to petition the state to make sure that their nomadic routes are allowed. Of course, the Rabadis have had that problem for a while, but the entire nomadic herding community is in crisis because of the privatization of land, the superhighways, the big industrial farming that's coming.
Yeah. Here in Goa, sometimes you see communities from Karnataka, I've forgotten what that name. No, Dhangars, yeah. They bring their cattle down, goats and mostly goats and cows. But I think they are being forced to come this side more because their access to grasslands and other places have been cut off by these superhighways that are being built all along the west coast. So we, to look at what is happening with the agricultural map of India today, we have to go back to, of course, the 90s when the structural adjustment policies were put into place, and how that disrupted the earlier systems of, earlier the food systems, because India had historically suffered from famines and droughts during the times of the colonial times. And so I think right in the beginning, there were a lot of safeguards put in place by the policymakers that started working in India post-independence. But slowly all those policies are being eroded, sometimes, but mostly by, of course, corporate interests. And I think the farmers are very right in kind of putting their foot down and not budging at all. I mean, it's a long fight, and they have maybe won one round in the sense that after 1921, those farm bills were put on hold by the government, but I'm sure they'll come back again. I mean, that's how it works. You don't win the battle once and for all. So this explains what PDS is, how it was set up, and how it functions in India today, and how it's also being dismantled in many ways. If anybody wants to say anything or make an intervention, even in between, please do. There's no problem.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Rather than just the two of us going on, if there are questions
I'm
and
sure
comments that you come
there is in this company, there must be people who have interesting points to make on this.
Yeah. India was applauded all over the world for the Food Security Act that was enacted, how many, 20 years ago now, because at least the state recognized the right to food and put it in legislation. India has a fairly progressive constitution. And then translating those constitutional provisions then to actual national legal enactable provisions was a big issue. But then, of course, there's a thing called political will in different states, but also, because we have a federal system, but also nationally. And as Orijit pointed out, subsequently, although structural adjustment in the name of liberalization, market opening sounded really good, started in the 90s, subsequent policies that were enacted actually undermined the Food Security Act. So food security then, rather than being a rights-based thing, that it's inherent right of every person, whether they're citizen or not a citizen, it doesn't matter, to be secure in their food with healthy, nutritious food. Instead of it being a right, it's become an act of sort of charity, that the state becomes the my baap that will make sure that, you're not super hungry,
Yeah.
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
And the question is, one is that please explain the hunger index to us. Because we see surplus of food all the time. So does it mean that they're hungry, or you talk about nutritional hunger? And the second thing I want to ask you is that does India truly have a food supply crisis, or is it a public distribution system problem? And I'd like to ask further question, but let's start with this.
Do you want to take that? On the issue of hunger, I think both are there. Now, India doesn't have famines anymore the way they used to be, right? Famines was when people don't have, this whole dictionary definition of famine, of how many days, for example, a person or a community doesn't have food. Those famines are more or less over. But hunger as a debilitating condition where you don't even have enough calories per day has been persisting in India. And now, so there's that issue. And then there's also the issue of micronutrient deficiency. One of the big challenges here is the calorific approach to food security. Because you're saying 1,800 or 2,000 calories per day, but depends on what work the person does. It depends on age. It depends on whether the person's childbearing. It also depends on what food they're actually getting. 2 donuts or, 6 white bread sandwiches will give you 2,000 calories. But is that nutrition? Is that what somebody needs or can work in the fields for? Is that what's appropriate for a pregnant woman? Is that appropriate for an aging person who's been working in the fields all the time? So both these exist. And one of the big challenges, I was just looking at, there's an international publication called The State of Food and Insecurity in the World, brought out by all the UN agencies combined. And there's no data for India. Normally, every country is supposed to report so they can make the food insecurity index. India is not providing data anymore. And I think that is a common thing across now. They're not gathering this data. So actually, policy is sort of being made in the, you're stabbing in the dark. There's that issue.
Yeah. And I think it's also at some level a deliberate act by the government. I think the overall approach is don't get rid of hunger, get rid of the hungry.
And sorry, there was another question, Monica. The other part of it was whether there's enough food being produced. Yeah. I think it's a combination. It's going to be a combination of the two. Earlier, there was enough food being produced, but not being distributed. And some places had surplus and so on. But I think now the food producing territories are also reducing because of land conversions and so on. And also, when people think of, or rather the policymakers or the mainstream conventional policy is thinking of food production, they're not linking food production with food availability. Because for a lot of, that's why very often in the social movements we use the word small-scale food providers, not producers necessarily, because a lot of food is gathered. Fishing. The fishers say, we're not producing anything. We don't want aquaculture. We're fishers. We gather, we harvest, whether it's from the wetlands or the sea or the rivers. So when those territories are being taken away or, curtailed, then that food is not available.
Yeah, when wetlands are being destroyed like here in Goa, then naturally the fish that you get, or the sea fish or whatever, the freshwater prawns, all of that. I mean, all of that is going down rapidly, even for the local population.
Can I ask a question a little bit connected with that question of whether there's a... Yeah, thanks, yeah. Connected with the question as to whether the problem is a supply problem or a demand problem or a distribution problem. I was wondering whether you think it's a good idea really for government to be putting more emphasis on increasing rural incomes in other ways, say, for example, by using things like the bio-waste, the crop residues. I mean, even in a place like Goa, you see a lot of burning, even a coconut husk, etc. So how about not only thinking about food, but thinking about the system? You talk about food systems to increase people's purchasing power. And the second is, in terms of all this gathering of food, whether it's fishing or whether it's from the forest, is there not a problem with us putting too much pressure on those ecosystems at the moment? So 2 questions. Thank you.
I think to answer your second question first, it's a question of balance and who is doing the collecting, and obviously the pressures of large scale collection for, let's say, a problem that is becoming visible now in Goa. I'll take a local example, is of the collection of forest mushrooms. Earlier, those mushrooms were harvested in limited amounts by communities, and there were something quite like, there was a demand and supply equation where you only could get this much of it, and then people would value it and they would enjoy it when it became available for that brief time, and then it's gone. But now what's happened is that there are many more people living in Goa who have moved in here over the time. They have also begun to see, oh, this is something special, valuable. So the demand for those mushrooms is going up, which is pushing people to gather deeper and deeper into the forest, or gathering more than they earlier would have. So it is all about a matter of balance, obviously. It's not a kind of a policy thing that you can decide, okay, yes, this way, that way, whatever. It's not black and white. Everything that one says has to be done in a balance. So I think it would be, as a policy, quite wrong to say no, local gatherers and hunters and fisher people should stop because we are protecting the environment. So I think that's an anti-people way to think. But at the same time, of course, one has to regulate. The market forces come in now, where the demand starts going up and people are willing to pay more money for it, and therefore there's a greater demand. I mean, there's a greater incentive for people to pull out more mushrooms than can be sustained. That has to be regulated. I mean, there has to be some way by which that can be done. So that's, I think the problem there is the demand supply capitalism that's going on. I mean, probably the way for the government to regulate something like this would be to say that, okay, no, there's only this much of it that's going to be made available, and only this much that the price of it should be, so that it doesn't get priced out of the local community who were consuming them forever. And so there has to be some sort of a regulation there to maintain a kind of a balance. That's and the same thing what you're saying about, I mean, in a way your first question is also sort of related to this, and I think I addressed that, but is there something more that you want to understand? So of course we know that our food security, a lot of it came out of our green revolution policies in the 1960s, where the introduction of the Green Revolution, like many other things, it was a mixed bag, but it created a huge ecological and social impact across the areas, especially Punjab and the North Indian states, where it was brought in a big way. But it did result in India becoming more food sufficient. But over time it has devastated the ecology, and also it has disrupted social relations in a huge way, because the food production systems earlier were different, and the relationship between communities was different, and the coming in of pesticides, fertilizers, seed distributors, and much larger capitalist-based networks have disrupted to the extent that researchers like Vandana Shiva say that the roots of the violence in Punjab can be found in the Green Revolution.
And this is a very important issue, the issue of farmer debt. Green Revolution and much of the commercial farming packages that come, there's hardly any regulation in terms of spurious seed and so on. And there is right now a seed act that is that the government has put out for comment. And that also then is weakening the amount of regulation that is there, and the kind of accountability of commercial hybrid and GM seeds producers and so on. But what ends up happening for the farmers is that during the Green Revolution, all was rosy for a while, but then when the environment got contaminated and the yields started to drop, their debt continued to increase. There was no relief for them. So in addition to the violence issues, for example, in Punjab, farmer suicide has been a huge issue in India. With Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, you've read that, Maharashtra.
This is the this chapter on National Food Security Act, which Shal just spoke about a little while ago. And the hunger deaths, farmer suicide, these are all very important aspects which something like a Food Security Act tries to kind of address. Okay, sorry. Okay, this is another point which I think, by the way, obviously I'm not showing you every page I'm just jumping between chapters. The midday meal schemes, again, a very good, social, social benefit based scheme, which serves two purposes, which is brings children to school and also ensures that they get much needed nutrition, is being watered down today by the current government. They're trying to privatize it. They're trying to take away the earlier system where the Anganwadi workers and others used to cook meals for the children, but now they're trying to privatize it and centralize it in the food and the making of kind of centralized kitchens, and then it gets sent out to all the schools. And that, of course, ensures, the earlier system ensures that food would be local and fresh. And now with this privatization programs, what's happening is that food is not necessarily appropriate to to the different areas or communities where people are eating. At the same time, it's not fresh. And at the same time, it's undermining, of course, the diverse eating habits and practices of the different children from different communities. And in that process, they're also bringing in this idea of maybe removing proteins like eggs from the meals. I think food and politics is, of course, there is every aspect of food is political. So the school-based kitchens were actually a very good system, and probably there probably were some difficulties also, but they were getting ironed out. Instead of which now that whole system is being phased away and is becoming centralized and privatized. So it's been renamed PM Poshan.
But the thing is that they're not just being renamed. And like the argument that many people are saying that MNREGA is just a renaming, it is not. There are substantial differences in these. And we don't have the time today to go into them, but I mean, we can point you towards resources where you can read them, or if you get in touch with us, we can share those materials with you.
Then we have a chapter about how people's eating habits, people who are consumers of meat are being targeted everywhere, and the government is either turning a blind eye or actually encouraging to the police, municipal corporation and others to harass and trouble people who sell meat or who sell meat products, like cafes that street vendors who do kebabs. And so we took up a case which happened in Gujarat. We studied it and illustrated his story and what happened in court. Finally, he was just a street vendor in Ahmedabad. In this case, as it says here, I mean, the vendor got relief, but that's not always the case. And this is, of course, the corporatization of food and how. And here, this chapter is set in an interesting way in a supermarket, and the person talking about. I mean, so as I said, I mean, throughout the comic, there are different voices talking about different aspects of the food, and here the person talking is there's a professor who's asking questions. Sorry, but the person talking about it is one of the workers at the supermarket, because he knows the methods by which things are procured and how they arrive at the supermarket shelves. So that's our last chapter, Way Forward, or various thoughts and ideas, which is more not prescriptions, but more like thoughts on how, what is the way forward to continue to ensure the right to food, food security, the social, the more socially oriented policies, how to preserve them, how to maybe stand up to the dismantling of those kind of policies. And how farmers' voices, what they feel, why they feel that not only should the MSP be improved, but it should be it should be spread across many more crops than right now is very few, and how to safeguard the farmers' rights. And okay, so now there is, once this came out a couple of years ago, and Chinta publishers from Kerala reached out to us, and they wanted to translate our comic into Malayalam. So Bhakshanavum Krishiyum. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but but anyway, so it's really nice to see that. What's interesting is that comics can be lend themselves to translation quite easily, because you just have these distinct little boxes with text in them, and you just have to remove the English text and replace it with Malayalam or any other language. So we're very happy and proud that our book got translated into Malayalam at least.
Now, we don't have the book for sale here, but we can. It's from Leftward Books, so you can purchase it. But if you would like to read the comics, because the comics were released on Instagram. 2 modules a week, no? We had 2 modules a week. And then on the website of my organization, Focus on the Global South, if you go to the website, just Google Focus on the Global South, you'll see our website. And then you'll see a microsite which will say Indian Agriculture and Comics. You can read the entire comic over there. You can see all the modules there, but not in Malayalam. But of course, the book is a good book to have. So I would say if you are able to order the book, please do. But in case for those who are not able to order the book, you can also read it.
It's available on Amazon.
This book, yeah, it is. So
Yeah. It's available from the publishers also, Leftward. It's available here. Oh,
great.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Lovely. So, anybody would like to ask questions, you can. Yeah. Yeah.
There's Tina and there's a person.
So
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Against the backdrop of abysmal numbers that you just shared, what role does your organization have in intervening with the government to kind of change policies?
Okay, let's take that. And Tina, you want to ask your question also, or make your comment?
My question is slightly different. That when you're talking, of course, there's value in talking about Gujarat and Punjab, which seem like the main places that we've talked about in relation to India. But my problem is with when you characterize that as India, because India is much more diverse, and the kinds of issues that come up, which you have discussed actually now in this conversation.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, about Goa, and the food producing areas are declining.
Yeah.
But somehow in these comics or any books about India, the narratives of Goa do not figure adequately, and that's something I just want to raise. I would like to.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there much more. Although I didn't kind of go into all the chapters, some of the chapters, there's a chapter in Assam, for example. There is nothing set in Goa or that talks about Goa, but there is a part of it which is set in Tamil Nadu and a part of it which is set in Assam. I mean, I didn't show all the chapters and pages, but we tried to be a little diverse in the kind of things that we address. But I agree that there needs to be more of that, and talking more about the kind of local issues that relate to food producing parts of the country and also the people. So,
and also the visuals, so that people can identify, like say when the Kerala the Malayalam translation, the visuals continue to be the same.
Yeah.
So for someone locally to identify in any place,
Yeah.
since it's a visual thing,
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
And that could be a project that's taken up collectively here also. If there are people here who are interested in doing this, let's take this up and make this much more sub-regional and contextual,
Yeah,
because it needs to happen.
Because this is a start. Anything that one comes out with is a starting point that inspires others as well. I mean, the point is to, let's say, it begins somewhere. It covers certain kind of ground, but obviously one book can't cover everything. So yes, so the hope is also that some young artists and writers in Goa will get excited by something like this and do something more Goa-centric. That is also something to hope for, and that's one of the reasons why one brings out stuff, so that it kind of spreads, the idea spreads.
On the issue of the number, the question that you'd asked, sir. So the thing is this. Now, my organization, what we're doing is we're continuing to research what's happening to small-scale food provision in different areas. So the way we tend to work is we work directly with local communities, grassroots communities, and their way of, and support, and their ways of, production, livelihood, and so on. And we work with them in the co-documentation. So we are doing this in the northeast of India, and then with different forest communities and small-scale farming and peasant communities and the fishing communities, the fish workers. And there are many other organizations like ours, which are sort of civil society, unfortunately, the umbrella is NGO, but all NGOs are not the same, and who are sort of activist research groups who are working with communities to co-document their reality and then take that and bring that to their policymakers and say, hey, this is happening to our forests, this is happening to, to our fields and so on. So there are many organizations doing that. There are other organizations that are trying to gather whatever information they can at the state level to be able to try to put numbers together. But the issue of actual data gathering at a national level is something that a state has to do because they have the institutions and that is their role, that's their obligation to us as citizens. It's their obligation to make transparent to the public what is happening to this country. And there's no getting away from that because you can put 100 NGOs together, 200 NGOs together, but there's no way that we have the apparatus to gather the kind of data that statistical institutes and state institutions are supposed to do. And the unfortunate thing is that even universities and colleges are now being told what they can research and report on. So this is something that I think needs a lot more engagement from us as Indians with our government, because the right to food is everybody's right. It's not only the right of some castes, no?
Yeah.
And some classes.
I think more and more is becoming obvious in the world today that people have to stand up if they want their democracy and their lives to be, their rights to be preserved. People have to be constantly alert and speaking up for them. Otherwise, it can be taken away anytime. If you see what's happening in the US right now, I think we grew up perhaps in a world where we thought democracy is something that's done and dusted and we have got it and now we can live in that idea, but obviously not. So I think ultimately there are NGOs, there are think tanks, there are policy organizations, there are so many academia, but citizens have to speak. Not only speak but act if they want their rights to be preserved. Just like the farmers movement is an inspiration. The farmers said that no, you can't take our livelihoods away. We're going to go on the street and we're not going to budge. And the government had to move back. So I think that is something that each of us as citizens today, if we value our rights, we need to be active. We need to be speaking about it. We need to be learning about it and becoming more aware of what's happening around us. So it seems that ultimately there are no systems in place which will guarantee you the rights that you think you have. You have to make sure that you preserve them at an individual level. Everybody needs to do that.
Yeah, I think we have time. We have 5 minutes left. So please go ahead, ask your question. Maybe we can take.
I just wanted to say that we do farming, so we realize the problems that farmers go through and what's happening in Punjab. But publications like yours create awareness. The average person just takes the food that they buy for granted, and they don't think about what the farmer goes through. And the tragedy is that despite people being hungry, we are exporting food. I mean, how sad is that? So I think more and more publications like yours, educated people like us, must appreciate what the farmer goes through, and the farmer is still as poor. The farmer does not make money.
Yeah.
So there are no policies. So, we have to figure out how to influence policies so that the farmer gets some benefit. Otherwise, why would they toil? I mean, exactly. Despite all the weather being against them and all the inputs that they put in which they don't even need, all those chemical fertilizers which are just poisoning the soil, the pesticides, the weedicides. So awareness has to be created. Yes. As you say, the public should have a voice, but the public, with publications like yours, we have to be more and more aware. That's the most important thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that input, because we hope that more people will come together and join hands. Because Orijit, maybe you want to say one last thing about the power of the visual that we were discussing, no? And communicating people.
I think that's because I'm a visual artist and I look at things in that way. But I think different media are powerful in their own ways, and it's really important for us to bring the knowledge that we collectively have in academia, through research organizations, policy organizations. How do you bring that down to the public? Otherwise, it just remains in those ivory towers, people talking to each other. So for us, using imagery is one way to bridge that gap between knowledge that is produced and kept within institutions and knowledge that becomes available to the public and perhaps becomes possible, which makes it possible to act upon.
I just have a question, very maybe daft one. When you said you had a research, when you take food, what do you define food as? The whole food, even a biscuit packet with a shelf life of 24 months is food. So what was your research done on?
It was done, our research is much more on what is mostly unprocessed. What is unprocessed, yeah. But unfortunately, what most people are getting, whether it's in the Kirana stores or now more and more in the supermarkets, is processed. And again, processing in and of itself is not a negative thing. So for example, in Goa, there is a whole tradition that now, in this dry season, fish will be dried and various fish products will be dried, because in the monsoon one cannot fish. And fish and things coming from the sea and water are some of the primary sources of protein for millions of people. So again, processing in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's just trying to see how much bulk is then being produced, how much is actually being made available for those who need it the most. Thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you know how to contact us, and we'll continue discussing. Thank you.
Thank you.